Hello, welcome back to this series on learning to live well in this life and body. Last week we talked about self-awareness and self-awareness as being foundational to self-care. We also introduced the concept of interoception and talked about how we may practice interoception. We may practice our ability to sense our internal world as a way of developing our self-awareness. We centered this conversation largely around the physical body, around the mind-body complex. And one key aspect that we sort of skipped over was the aspect of the self that may be thought of as the spirit. And ultimately, this is spirit-based work. This is a spiritual practice at its core. And with any spiritual practice, the ultimate goal of this work is to be returned to our oneness, to be made whole again. This practice comes to me largely through Vipassana. Vipassana is a Buddhist concept and may be defined literally as special seeing. It is often defined as insight, and this insight, I think, is a good definition, as I think it's easy to see how it may be considered synonymous with interoception. The practice of Vipassana is largely centered around the practice of scanning the body, looking for sensation. The Buddha practiced Vipassana as he meditated on the nature of reality, and he found, among other things, that life is filled with pain and suffering. That's not to say that pain and suffering is the only thing that there is, but that we all experience it. With this pain and suffering, the Buddha also realized that everything is impermanent. So when we experience pain or suffering, we may be comforted by the fact, by the knowing that it will not last forever. It is also important to recognize that when we experience joy or pleasure, that is also impermanent, and so we cannot cling to it. The Buddha considered this practice to be key to seeing things as they really are, to seeing the true nature of reality. And this true nature of reality exists within us. When we look outside of ourselves, we are only able to perceive what we are able to perceive. Everything we take in is a perception. When I see another person, I cannot know what their internal experience is. I may only perceive what I can see. And that is then filtered through the judgment of my mind. So it is another layer away from reality, whereas what takes place inside of myself may be considered more real. I, like many people, I believe, learned Vipassana through S.N. Goyenki in a 10-day silent retreat where you sit and practice Vipassana meditation for 10 hours a day, 10 days a week, 10 days in a row. It is sort of impossible to describe what you might find through this practice. I can tell you about my experience, but my experience is very different from the next person's experience. It would be very different from your experience. My internal world, my internal experience is very different than yours. The nature of my suffering is very different than the nature of your suffering. So through this practice, some people's experience is very much in the physical body, some is very much in the emotional body, some is very much in the mind, and it can vary. It can move between the worlds, and oftentimes it can be, especially as you go deeper, it can be very amorphous. So it can be very hard to define the experience as simply, I feel a pain here, or I feel this emotion, or I have this thought. It can be a complex. It can be a mixture of the three, and it can include aspects of the spirit which make it very hard to put into words. Through this experience of sitting, through this experience of vipassana, through this experience of interoception, we may learn to realize the suffering, the nature of our suffering. Often our suffering remains hidden to us. We push it away because we don't like to experience it. And so we are only made aware of it when it rears its ugly head, when it makes itself known. And it does this through maybe an outburst of emotion, through chronic pain, maybe through disease. And through our practice of vipassana, we may experience this, we may know this suffering. Through this knowing and experiencing of it, we may process it. And through the processing of it, we may ultimately be rid of it. By experiencing it, we allow it to move through us so that we may move into the next stage. So I think I'm going to leave this here with you today. I'm trying to keep these videos sort of short. I don't want to overwhelm you with information. I think often we are only able to take in a little bit at a time and what we're ready to take in. And I hope this sort of expands a bit on what we talked about last week, and maybe rounds out a little bit your understanding of this work that we will be doing. In my next video, we're going to be moving back into the physical body, so I'm going to be talking to you a bit about a sitting position. We'll talk a bit about posture, and we're going to talk about sitting in a chair, which is a very foundational, a very basic human thing that we do that many of us could benefit from doing a little bit more optimally as far as our structure and our form is concerned. So as always, if you are following along, please leave me a question or comment down below, especially if as the series progresses, I would like to expand a bit on some of these concepts, some of these things we're talking about. So if you find one to be particularly interesting, or you want to know more about one, let me know. And I will hope to see you in my next video. Take care.